What happens when Donald Trump says, now we're done with NATO? Now Europe's going to have to come in and set their own table. See, Trump and Russia can create their own reality just by coming up with an agreement. Now, there's lip service going to be paid for Europe and this, that, and the other thing. But, the bottom line is they said America's not putting troops on the ground in Europe, in Ukraine. Zelensky said he can't even consider a peacekeeping force without American troops. So now there's not going to be a peacekeeper. But let's say he changes his mind. Okay, I'll take those Europeans. I'll take 100,000 Europeans. But then the United States said, yeah, but you don't get Article 5 protection. So any Europeans that go in there, you're not part of NATO, which means if you piss the Russians off and they kill you all, you're on your own. And there's not a single European nation that's going to do that. So how can Trump make an agreement without Europe? I just told you how. Europe doesn't matter. Trump can make whatever rules he wants to, and Europe will have to fall in. It's an American-based reality as far as Europe's concerned. It's a Russian-based reality as far as solving the issue of Ukraine is concerned. And I think that Trump is willing to do what's necessary to concede to Russian realities. You heard Hegseth talk about it. And so that's the reality. There's going to be no American troops, no NATO. We're cutting off military support for Ukraine, which means Europe's going to have to step up. And, the price tag gets really, really outrageous at this point in time. It's not just, Europe proved they can't afford the 2% GDP that was necessary to make NATO viable. That's why NATO's so weak. But now, in order to, be part of an American participation, they needed to get that number up to 5. None of them can afford that. And now America's pulling out. That participation, taking the lead now is 10 to 15%. It's it. Europe can't take the lead. The realities. I mean, screw Europe. Ukraine will never, ever, ever, ever be a member of NATO. It's as simple as that. I don't care. You can have, Starmer, we are committed to Ukraine being. No, you're not. Remember, NATO is a consensus-based organization. And when Big Daddy says no, that's the end of it. End of discussion. Kids don't no longer get to scream, we want chocolate. Daddy said no. What you got Sweden now? The newbies regretting their vote already to join NATO, saying, no, they're going to be part of NATO. We guarantee it. No, they won't. Ukraine will never, ever, ever be part of NATO. It doesn't matter how many pathetic European leaders come out and say so. It isn't going to happen because Big Daddy said no. So the realities will define this situation. That's how it happens. Because Europe can't do anything. They can't do anything. We'll set the conditions. You have to pay for it all, Europe. You have to go in. No protection from Big Daddy. You want to play big, jump in the playing field with Russia and try to impose some sort of security arrangement in Ukraine without Russian concurrence? It's on you. And when Russia bombs you, Daddy ain't going to be there to help you. They just defined the fact that Europe can't do it. So it's not about keeping the Europeans out. Europe can't even come in and play the game. They can't buy into the table. The United States and Russia have set a high-stakes poker game. And Europe wants to come in with a handful of $5 chips. It doesn't work that way. You got to bring the $1,000 chips and you got to have a whole bunch of them. And they don't. I think Donald Trump he has bigger things in mind. He has 4 years to, reduce expenditures in America by trillions of dollars. You don't do that by continuing past failed practices. Now, if the model that existed previously about Ukraine was a successful model producing positive outcomes for the United States, Europe, and everybody, then I could see Donald Trump saying, yeah, I'm going to continue that. But it's not a positive model. It's a model of failure. So Donald Trump's not going to double down on stupid. And I don't think the Russians are going to, again, I just point out there was a 90-minute phone call between Trump and Putin. That phone call didn't happen because Donald Trump alone wanted it to happen. It happened because the Russians also wanted it to happen, and both sides were ready for it to happen, meaning that they weren't going to allow little issues and little disagreements to get in the way of the larger picture. There's now a delegation being formed up to begin meeting with their Russian counterparts in Saudi Arabia to start framing out a larger agreement that will be hashed out when Trump and Putin meet in Saudi Arabia. That's the direction we're heading. Putin just invited Trump and President Xi to the 80th anniversary of the May Day celebration. I don't know if Trump's going to make that trip, but I'll tell you what, it would be such a great thing to have a high-level American delegation, maybe led by the vice president, in Moscow on May 9th to participate in this celebration of an alliance. This is the strategic direction we're heading. We're not headed into preserving a broken European system. We're not headed into the place where we're going to sacrifice everything because French sensibilities have been insulted. We're not going to preserve that which has failed. We are headed in a bold new direction. And I just think that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin both recognize the need to move forward. And the Russians are smart enough to know that you have an administration that is understanding of the concept of reality and understanding of the concept of Russian perspectives. And so I don't think the Russians are going to die on a minor issue. There will be some fundamentals that can't be violated, but I think you'll find that the Russians are amenable to certain things, understanding that, for instance, when we talk about security guarantees, there won't be a European security force because, Europe can't afford it. And no European power is going to go in there. So the United States is going to have to come up with a compromise. So then the Russians will have the Russians are the best prepared diplomats in the world. Right now, you have the United States trying to craft together a team. But the Russians have genuine experts, and they're putting together a team right now of some very competent people who are not only going to know what to say about when, projecting Russia's national security requirements, but they're also going to know about what America wants out of this and be willing to make the compromises where they can make compromises to get this thing wrapped up as quick as possible. Neither side wants to go. And again, the fact now that Trump appears to understand Russian realities, that, for instance, if a territory is, called Russian, it's going to be Russian. Now, I don't know. I mean, are the Russians willing to concede the right bank of Kherson as part of some sort of compromise? I mean, that damn river, the Dnieper River, causes, problems, rebuilding that bridge and all that stuff. I don't know. Maybe, and at this point in time, how many Russians are truly left in the right bank? Russian lists, they've been purged, et cetera. So, is that something Russia could make a compromise on? I don't know. Only Russia can make that decision. I think Donetsk has to be totally freed. Zaporizhia and Kherson, there might be some compromises made to straighten out the line, to normalize a border there so that it's not based upon, haphazard domestic borders that, didn't have to take into account, national interests. The Russian perspective is Kursk is ours. Every Ukrainian there will die. And we're not going to allow any situation that ends other than that. So if Ukraine wants to continue to so far, the numbers of sacrifices are closing in on 60,000 dead. 60,000 dead in the Kursk incursion alone. And the Russian perspective is, you're never going to get Kursk. We're never going to agree to that. And if you want to continue to put troops in there, we'll just continue to kill them until they're all dead. That's the reality of it. In the West, we bought into this romanticism that somehow, the brave Ukrainian incursion into Kursk has created a permanent situation that will enable Ukraine to trade Russian territory for Ukrainian territory. Dream on. That literally is one of the realities. And that's why Russia will never agree to a ceasefire. Because when this conflict ends, every Ukrainian will be out of Kursk. There's talk that the Ukrainians were starting to print ballots for a presidential election. It'd be interesting to see, if they held an election while the negotiations were still taking place, and what would happen if Zelensky was voted out. So this is we live in interesting times right now, but I do believe that the Trump administration and the Russian government are going to negotiate in good faith to bring this conflict to an end. And once the war in Ukraine ends, and once the situation becomes resolved and the border becomes defined, the American troops are out. There's not going to be a permanent American large-scale presence, American military power in Poland. We're done with Europe. Hegseth said, Fortress America, he used that term, and he said we're pivoting to the Pacific. We're unplugging from Europe. I think right now, I think the primary will be Germany. I think the way Vance was talking is that he's disgusted with Germany, disgusted with what Germany has become, and that when he was in Poland, he spoke about, maybe even more American troops coming into Poland. So I think what you're going to see is 20,000 American troops going home and headquarters staffs that were in Germany relocating to Poland. He said that that's essential until the Ukrainian border is defined. But here's the thing about the Poles. Those troops aren't there forever. So even if it's a temporary reallocation of resources to Poland, the Poles need to understand that that's temporary, that long-term we're looking for peace with Russia, not a permanent state of conflict with Russia. We're looking to resolve those issues, and the Poles better get on board, because we're not going to be there to hold their hands. And at the end of the day, when we leave, Poland's going to have to be able to either be big enough to stand up to Russia. Why? Russia isn't looking for a war, or change their mindset. And again, I think you'll find as this wave of change, the reality of the necessity for change sweeps over Europe, governments one by one are going to fall. They can't get in line with the new reality. There's not going to be any governments that survive long term who say, no, we're standing up to America. No, you're not. No, you're not. You understand there's a president right now that will stop all LNG shipments to Europe in a heartbeat. He'll just turn the ships around. Say, I could go sell them to Asian markets. A lot of the Asians are a little pissed. We want to compete with the Russian gas in China. And you had the Chinese foreign minister say, why should we stop buying Russian gas? It's there, it's readily available, and who's going to provide gas to replace it? Don't tell us what to do. But the United States might say, well, we want to start competing in that market more by reallocating LNG shipments that are headed to Europe. And then the Europeans are now screwed because A, they're going to have to buy on the spot market, which is going to make the prices explode. And B, they're going to have to buy Russian gas because there's no other alternative. So I think the Russians are smart enough to know that they have to give Trump a victory. They have to, politically. And they're not going to sacrifice the big picture for something small. So let's see what happens, But like I said, I think a lot of these problems are going to be sorted out, in a face-to-face meeting when the Russians, the Americans finally get down. And the key thing for the American perspective is are the Russians negotiating in good faith? And I think the Russians will come in and negotiate in good faith. I think the Russians know that, if they're going to say that this is fundamental, reality-based, hard power reality, according to Hegseth, they have to demonstrate why that's the case. And they can't come in and make frivolous claims that aren't backed up by, we insist on Odessa and Kharkov. And the Trump guys will go, but you don't have any troops in Odessa and Kharkov. In Kharkov, you got some troops, but, you're going to have to get your troops out of Kharkov. But again, the Russians may say, if we're going to give up the right bank of Kherson, then you're giving up, the area around Kharkov that we currently occupy. That kind of exchange. And every Ukrainian in Kursk will be dead before Russia does any exchange on that. That just isn't going to happen. Russia might be able to play ball with the Novorossiya, trading territory to clean up the boundaries. That's a reality of most conflicts. But I do think that the Russians right now are very realistic. They know that they're getting what they wanted, no NATO for Ukraine. They also understand that Zelensky is out, that there's going to be elections. Here's, the United States is talking about elections. The Russians will seek to control those elections and control the outcome of those elections. So Russia can concede little things up front with the understanding that down the road, with these elections that will be had, that they will get what they conceded back to them anyways. I think that's just the way the Russians are going to negotiate. Trump just wants to get the hell out of Ukraine. And he wants to do it in a way that it saves face. So, you heard Hegseth say there's going to be difficult compromises on both sides. But there won't be a single living Ukrainian in Kursk by the time this thing is done. That's why there is no ceasefire. That's the other big thing that people don't seem to understand. These negotiations are taking place while the Russians continue to, create new realities on the battlefield. And this puts a sense of, and I think it's done deliberately by the Trump administration, because this puts pressure on the Ukrainians. Every day, a negotiation without conclusion is just more territory lost. And the Ukrainians realize you can't just wait this thing out, or else the Russians are going to take everything and you're going to get nothing. And so the Ukrainians will, be called upon to do certain things. The idea that Ukraine is using Kursk as a negotiating leverage is it's just a non-starter. It isn't happening. It doesn't exist. Bloomberg can write about it all they want. The Wall Street Journal can write about it all they want. But I can tell you right now, the perspective from Russia is it's just, they don't even consider it. Talk to Abdi Aladanov, one of the Russian commanders in the region. It's not even on. It's not even on on the menu. It's not a possibility. The only possibility for the Ukrainians that are in Kursk is death or surrender. It's just, don't think there's going to be too many prisoners taken anymore. If you're a Ukrainian in the Kursk region, you might want to go home. I am disgusted by Europe. I don't believe Europe as an entity truly exists. It's this fake thing, the European Union, that's been superimposed over nation states that have forgotten what it means to be a nation state, sovereignty. And Europe, stick it in your ear. You guys got to pay for your security. I think you're going to see in the next couple of days announcements about the withdrawal of American troops from Europe. We're done with this nonsense. We're done with this mess. Last century, we went across the ocean twice to solve Europe's problems. We're not going to do it again. We're done with you guys. Fix it yourself, especially now that you have, well, at least you had, functioning economies, but you destroyed them. You trashed them by signing up with the sanction. And if you're going to say, well, America made us do it, then that just shows how weak you are. But, America didn't make you do it. The Biden administration made you do it. Had you stood up, maybe it wouldn't have happened. But now we have a new administration, a new sheriff in town that's saying, we're done with you. We're disgusted by you. We don't support you anymore. And he's calling them out. It's the best speech delivered by an American in the history of the Munich Security Conference. The best speech, the strongest speech, and the one that will have the greatest impact, because J.D. Vance put Europe on notice that we're finished with you. And all the Europeans that were thinking America would never unplug, think again. We're done with you. I mean, you are literally the problem. J.D. Vance called it out. You're the problem. Europe's the problem. You create all the problems. Everything could be solved if Europe would just stop being stupid, led by unelected bureaucrats who come in to try and impose an agenda that nobody in Europe supports. Put it up to the vote of the people of Europe. They will not support this ridiculous agenda. And now they're talking about doing the same thing in Germany, annulling a political party because they disagree with the stance that the people of Germany may take by providing their votes to this political party. Europe is this fake conglomerate of political elites and economic elites who seek to service the United States. And that's what they've been doing, servicing the United States economically and politically. But, we've had weak leadership in America that lost track of the fact that we're supposed to be the bosses, and we allowed Europe to take over in Ukraine. Thank God we finally have a president that said, no, we're ending this stupid war, the dumbest of all wars. And J.D. Vance is 100% correct. Don't sit here and pretend that you embrace democracy. I mean, we support Ukraine, a free and democratic. There's nothing democratic about democracy, about Ukraine. It's a military dictatorship, literally, in every way, shape, and form. So don't call it a democracy, but Europe's been confused about what democracy is for a long time. J.D. Vance is 100% correct to call out what happened in Romania, where the Romanian people made a choice for change. The Romanian people made a choice for change. Sovereign people of a sovereign nation. And yet Europe came in and intervened with fake manufactured intelligence, sent it up to the Romanian security services, to Romanian courts, who acted unilaterally to annul the will of the people, only to later on admit, no, there wasn't any Russian interference. None, zero, zip. They just didn't like the outcome. The thing about Europe is that they don't have, a common, election-based mechanism to get their officials. Each state has different things, but what you're seeing is one by one, they're falling, they're collapsing, they're being purged out. Eventually, Schultz's history. I mean, J.D. Vance wouldn't even meet with him. You saw that, right? You know why he wouldn't meet with him? Because he ain't going to be in power much longer. Why waste the time? He's a nobody. Perfect response. Perfect response. And we should do the same thing to the French. Figure it out, guys, and then we'll meet with you. But I mean, why waste time talking to Emmanuel Macron or his prime minister when the prime minister is an illegitimate prime minister shoehorned in by Macron because he can't accept the electoral results that took place in France. He can't accept the will of the people. You want America to meet with that, to endorse that. Europe will have to purge itself of these political elites, and they're not going to self-purge. They can't. They have committed to a course of action that they can't reverse away from. And so the only way they get removed is through the power of the vote. The former French citizens, the former German citizens who have sold out any concept of national sovereignty in favor of this broad brush thing called Europe that doesn't exist. These people have committed too much political and economic capital into this failed enterprise. And it's the same thing I said about the Iraq War. America went to war on the basis of a lie, but how are we going to change that? It isn't going to change because America suddenly woke up and realized it was wrong. It changed because the politicians who committed political capital to the Iraq problem, they had to leave. You needed, several election cycles to purify the congressional pool, so to speak, so that people could change voting outcomes and not lose their political jobs. We just told Europe. I mean, remember, it wasn't just but a year ago that we had a president talking about the sacred obligation of the United States to Europe. There was no sacred obligation. He was part of the establishment. The establishment had transatlantic bonds with the European establishment, and they played off of each other. It's not about the American people. The American people don't have a sacred obligation to Europe if Europe's job is to undermine American democracy. And we take umbrage at any notion. When I have the British saying that they can come across the water and arrest me and take me away because of a post I put on the internet, I say, bring it on. And I love J.D. Vance. Bring it on, Europe. You want to do this? You want to play that game against us, America? You want to call it the ugly American? I don't care. I don't care anymore because we're trying to break free of the old ugly America. We've got a president that says that we shouldn't be running around, trying to solve problems militarily, that these are economic issues. He'd like to flex America's economic muscles. Good luck with that. I don't know how strong those muscles are, but he's done with the war game. He's done with playing the bomb game, and yet the world seems upset with this. And I'm sick and tired of that. If you want to bomb the world, Europe, build your own damn airplanes, build your own damn bombs, and pay the damn consequence. Don't expect us to do it for you. One of the biggest wastes we have out there is the nuclear weapons enterprise. We just spend a lot of money for a weapon we can never use because if we use it, we all die. And to accept this is the insanity of the United States for so long, is to say, well, we have to have it. But the problem is if you have it, then you got to use it. Remember, it was Biden administration that said, we're ready to have a nuclear exchange with Russia. They're ready to have a nuclear war with Russia, stated by a nuclear war planner and strategic command, acting on the instructions given to him by the Biden administration. This was in November, ladies and gentlemen. The United States was ready to have a nuclear war with Russia. That's insane. The literal definition of insanity. Thank God we have a president now who's saying, no, we need to get rid of these weapons. It's a difficult path. The Chinese have already come out and said, thanks, but no thanks. You and Russia got these huge nuclear arsenals. You guys work on getting your arsenals down, and then we can talk. You lead by example. And when the Russians are talking to the United States about nuclear reductions, we have to factor in the French and the British. And also, the United States is going to say, well, what about North Korea? So now we just identified all these things. So, an idea that I'm actually publishing an article today that I'm promoting this. We have to create a new paradigm of nuclear disarmament that is global in scale. See, Trump is already thinking smart, getting the big three together. But I'm telling you, Miranda, the big three can't talk about meaningful reductions unless you take into account the other factors that lead to the necessity to maintain nuclear deterrence. We're not giving up weapons if North Korea has weapons. It ain't going to happen. So, and North Korea is not giving up weapons as long as we have weapons. India's not giving up weapons. Pakistan's not giving up, the whole thing. Well, the easiest thing Trump can do right now, and I'm a strong advocate of this, is when he starts talking to the Russians, because remember, under Biden, we weren't talking to the Russians. There's one arms control treaty left, the New START treaty. It expires in February of next year. If it expires, there's now no constraint, and we will have an arms race that'll bankrupt everybody involved and make nuclear war